We are live. Sorry about being just a couple minutes late. Usually I try to start actually a couple minutes early, so this has been just a little bit later start than what we have had in the past. Again, this is an Ask Me Anything live stream, so feel free to put your questions down below, and if you're going to put your question in there, let me just show you what. If you indicate down below @WeTheGovern, it's just a little bit easier for me to spot it in the questions when you put them up. So it looks like Sanera Frankenstein is going to be the first person whose question I answer here. But the one thing I was going to mention, there's a couple things going on this week, of course. If you're kind of keeping track of the political process a little bit and what's happening around Washington State, this is the week of the Washington State Republican Convention in Spokane, and I will be out there. I don't have a formal leadership role in the party. I've been a PCO for quite a while. I think going back to 2015, maybe sometime like that, maybe 2014. But so, which is kind of a precinct committee officer, is kind of that entry-level position in the party. I do think I'll be helping a bit with the 3rd Congressional District. If you happen to live in Southwest Washington and you're in the 3rd Congressional District, I'll probably be there assisting or helping to run that part of the convention, that kind of breakout part of the convention. But otherwise, that's a big deal. This is kind of the first time the Republicans have had an early convention like this. I actually recorded a quick video today just outlining just some questions that had come up on Monday night's Thurston County Republican Candidate Endorsement Forum that they had a while ago. And I'm really just trying to clear up, I'm hoping, at least giving my opinion anyway, on just what the convention does, what it doesn't do. And if you want to ask any questions about that, feel free to. I can talk about it now. There's no super secret sauce or anything hidden here, but it's just about what they hope to achieve with the Republican convention. And I did a little video about that earlier today as well. I got a little caught up. There's a program. Sometimes people are wondering about different events or programs that I'll be at. There's a program called, it's in Seattle here. What is it? The Seattle Channel, if you're familiar with it. I've been on this program before. It's been a few years. And I'm actually filling in for a speaker that couldn't make it. I think Brian Haywood was going to be there. They're having a panel discussion about 2117, Initiative 2117, repealing the carbon tax scam. And I think Representative Walsh is going to be there with me, and then there's going to be a couple of other people. Representative Joe Fitzgibbon, Democrat from the 34th District, will be on the panel as well on the other side, and then another person that I don't know really. So, and I anticipate that. I don't know if they show it live. I'm going to record it tomorrow in Seattle, but I don't know if they show it live while it's being recorded or if it just stays in the Seattle channel and it's pre-recorded and they just keep playing it after that for a while. They might have even sent me some information about it. I was just caught up in trying to get things organized and being prepared for that event. But so if you want to see, it would be much more interesting if Brian Haywood was on that panel, but I'm filling in as kind of the amateur hour volunteer, last-minute guy to step in, and so we'll see how it goes. I'm kind of interested. It is mostly an audience in Seattle, obviously, so generally that's going to be fairly skewed in favor of increased big taxes and all that kind of stuff. At the same time, I will point out that a heck of a lot of signatures were gathered from people who live in Seattle that want to repeal this stupid tax. So I'm real curious to see just how that program goes down tomorrow, and hopefully I do a good job representing at least the viewpoint that I have on why that matters as public policy and why I believe that it's an important thing for people to vote in favor of in November. The other thing, I haven't really thought too much past this convention. I know I've got some speaking engagements coming up. I believe I noticed on my calendar I had something with the Evergreen Women's Republican Club next Thursday, but I haven't worked out all the logistics on that. So I think that's still on the schedule, which is going to be in Snohomish County. So I anticipate being up there for that. And I know I've tried to mention to people people have asked me to try to highlight some stuff like that, like when I know I'm coming out to some events. So that's about the only one I can think of right now that's on my calendar that I have coming up. There's some other things that are further out there. I know in June I'll be speaking at the Lincoln Day dinner for the Skagit County Republicans, and I might even have some events over in Eastern Washington over the next month or two. So anyway, with that being said, feel free to start putting your questions down below, and I'll try to link up to them when we see as I'm answering them. And I kind of like this program because you can actually, or this little change in the program here, because I think you can actually see the question that I'm attempting to answer, or at least do my best to answer, and you can kind of see it when I get to some of these. So, Siniera, are you familiar with the details of the latest proposed bill regarding squatters' rights? And if so, what are they? I don't think, at least in our state, I don't think there's a squatters bill that's been proposed. I would say that there really shouldn't be much in the way of squatters' rights. Now, Washington State has always had a law out there related to what's it called? It's like where you occupy and do some work on some land, and after a certain number of years, that you actually own it. Now I'm blanking on the term that's used for it, but I've dealt with this in property rights disputes a few times before. So, but I think that this whole squatters' rights thing is ridiculous. Squatters shouldn't have any rights at all, because it just simply encourages theft and dishonesty and criminal activity. So it's a great harm on property rights, and there's no such thing as squatter rights. They should be convicted of crimes and removed and not allowed to be there occupying somebody's home. I mean, the stories that have come out about this around the country, and we had a couple in Washington as well, and a couple cities up in King County, and I thought Snohomish County, if I remember right. And they seemed like edge cases, but once you saw the stuff that's going on in Atlanta, or I think it was in New York and some of these other places, it seemed pretty dramatic. So obviously this is something that needs to be resolved and just, fixed as much as possible. So anyway, so I don't have a lot. There's been some discussion of having some more explicit approach to addressing squatters' rights in Washington State as well. But I'm not aware of any bill that's being proposed, and right now the legislature doesn't start again until January, so there is no legislation that would come through. It's possible that you would have some local jurisdictions maybe trying to come up with something. Adverse possession. Here we go. Thank you. It was adverse possession. Why was I blanking on that? So anyway, sorry about that. Adverse possession was what I was talking about. And anyway, there's some laws and rules around that. So anyway, Jonathan, thank you. Good luck for tomorrow. Hopefully we'll do okay, and I won't embarrass anybody out on the Seattle channel when we go to discuss why Washingtonians need to be repealing the stupid carbon tax scam. Jason, you got a question here about what's your thoughts on Colorado House passing an assault weapons ban? It's even worse than Washington. Do you think the 10th Circuit will give you a more successful challenge? Generally, the 10th Circuit is better than the 9th Circuit, which is the federal circuit where we live in Washington, and it covers Oregon and California. That's a terrible circuit, and actually I think it covers Idaho, if I remember right. But the 10th Circuit, which is kind of the next circuit court, federal circuit court, is probably a better place for repeal. But gosh darn it, I hate throwing our freedoms and liberty in the hands of judges. So one of the things we need to do is just start voting out people that support this type of restriction on your ability to defend yourself, and who are clearly unaware of constitutional rights and freedoms that we have. I mean, that's a big problem that we have, and you just can't presume that just because somebody's a judge that they're going to end up coming through with you on it, even though the judges have overturned a lot of these laws lately, including in Washington recently with the high cap ban being overturned, even though there was an emergency stay and some of that drama back and forth. The point is the ruling's in our favor for freedom and liberty on that one, and that's at state court. It's not even in federal court yet, which is pretty neat. But yes, Colorado is another state that desperately needs help. And gosh, the activists out there just have to become more capable as well. I think that they need a little bit of help in Colorado. Alex, you got a question here. How hopeful are you of a Republican candidate being elected as either governor or AG in November? Actually, the funny thing is, those are the two races right now where I feel the most hopeful of some of the statewide races. I'm actually fairly optimistic, potentially, for OSPI, which is the Superintendent of Public Instruction, and also Public Lands Commissioner. And it's kind of interesting. One of the reasons why I feel like those four races, I mean, right now we don't yet really have a campaign that I've seen for Secretary of State. I realize at the last minute 3 people have thrown their hat in the ring, but and Phil Fortunato is a state senator, so he's been around for a while, but nobody's raised any money. It's not that clear that there's a real campaign there. The state auditor, state treasurer race, and insurance commissioner of all things, which is where we actually do need some sanity there. I haven't seen that there's a serious campaign yet for those positions. Now, they're lower ticket, they get ignored. Lieutenant governor, same thing. They tend to get ignored quite a bit, so not sure what's going on for that. But the Republican, the campaign for governor is pretty interesting. And I don't like basing much on polls. I don't trust polling. Polling tends to be partisan and biased, depending on who paid for the poll. And polling companies inevitably game the system so that whoever paid for them gets results that makes them feel like they should just keep coming back and getting more. And so it's hard to necessarily make too much of a judgment on this. But I will say that the chances of a Republican probably coming through for both governor and AG are reasonably high. I mean, they're probably better than they've been in a while. It does sort of depend on how the primary results are going to be able to indicate quite a bit. Depending on which Republican right now, I mean, obviously the Republican who's probably leading is Reichert, is probably the leading candidate at this point in time. I'll base that in part on the fundraising numbers that I'm seeing that he's posting on the Public Disclosure Commission site. Semi Bird would be number 2. He just hasn't raised as much money. If he's sitting here, I tell you that. He would know that. He knows that too. It makes it very hard for you to get your message out there if you haven't raised more money. And also, this week kind of sets the tone to some extent. It doesn't close the door, but it sets the tone a little bit on who's going to be kind of getting momentum behind them going into filing week in May. And then the other thing is you never really know how filing week goes. There is what happens when you have candidates who haven't raised a lot of money yet. It does open the door to other candidates to jump in at the last minute with a lot more money. And so there's always that potential that somebody decides to jump in between now and May 10th, right, which is the end of filing week. I think I might have said May 11th at one time, but it's actually May 10th. So end of the day, May 10th. And then if you decide you made a mistake, you can always withdraw your name May 13th. That's always been a funny little option. Let me tell you that week in May is a crazy one, particularly on the Democrat side, where they'll usually spend that time lobbying very hard on candidates who they want to pull out of the primary process so that they don't have the same problem the Republicans always do to themselves by flooding the zone with a bunch of candidates that simply cancel each other out, and then you don't get any Republican on the general ballot. That's how a top 2 primary works when you have a jungle primary like Washington. But I would anticipate that both Pete Serrano running for the AG's office is in kind of a good spot because he's the only Republican that's going to be on the ballot, it looks like. And he's got momentum. He's got a little bit of name recognition, but he's got total endorsement across the board from everybody that's on the center-right rational side of the spectrum. And so you have 2 Democrats in that race who are basically bludgeoning themselves. One of them, Nick Brown, has been chosen as kind of I did a video on this a little while ago if you want to get my full take on it. But Nick Brown, who lost a Survivor game back in 2001 in Survivor Australia, it's kind of funny, got kicked off the island for being lazy and not being able to work with each other. So he's a good Democrat, and so he's the chosen one in that race by the political insiders. Governor Inslee's wrote him a check. But you also have Manka Dhingra, whose ego has grown increasingly large and has driven her to basically run for that position first, which is why I think the insiders put Nick Brown in. And so there's going to be a huge fight between the two of them going right down to the primary. And that sort of helps Pete Serrano, because you're going to probably have both of those, both Nick Brown and Monka Dinkra probably trying to determine that each one's the crazier one than the other. I don't know for sure, but that's kind of what it looks like. So I believe that they're going to be dealing with some issues, and that opens the door for Pete Serrano to have a fairly easy primary, get on the general, and depending on how he does in the primary, it would be sort of an indication of getting a new AG, and it'd be very nice to see if we got a real one. But we have to see it's all just kind of smoke and mirrors until you actually see what a primary result shows. That's better than any of these surveys that are out there, and that'll give you a sense of what's going on as well. V-Track, what reason will the state Supreme Court use to overturn the carbon tax repeal? Does the initiative have any similarities to $30 car tabs? No, and I'll tell you why. There's a couple differences here. Number one, to be fair to Tim Eyman in that case, on the $30 car tabs, is that he was really running a solo operation. He didn't have money for attorneys or anything else, and that's not the case right now with the Let's Go Washington initiatives. There's a lot of attorneys, there's a lot of people ready to defend and who have reviewed it before it ever was filed. And so the Supreme Court might be getting a lot of pressure to overturn it, but we'll see. I think it's going to be harder for them to do that than it has been in the past. It's a much more, there's a lot bigger campaign behind it, so I just think it's tougher. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court is fairly political, so it shouldn't matter that there's a bigger group, but that's probably what's going to happen. So I'm feeling pretty good that it passes, and I'm feeling pretty good that it survives a legal challenge, and I'm feeling pretty good that you'll hear great wailing and gnashing of teeth of all the grant grifters and the billionaires who wanted that as a cheap and easy way to fund their investments, which is essentially what it is. There's a question here from Thunderstriker. Hello again. It's good to have another live stream with you once more. How's it going? Well, that's not a question, but I'll answer it. It's kind of a question, but not really. It's going well, very busy right now. So I'm not sure, overall, I have not been able to get as many videos up just lately, so bear with me. We're trying some new systems out here, and it's mostly my fault in doing video prep. I'm doing a bunch of research on some projects that I want to work on early in the election cycle. Some of them are kind of experimental activist-type projects. Some of them are some more investigation in exposing corruption in a number of different cities. As many of you know, we've had some turnover in some of these local cities. There's been new people that have come into public office, and they're having to do audits and just find out what's going on in Longview and Kelso and Yakima and other places. And I think there's a lot of stuff that's going to come out of what they're uncovering right now, especially seeing how the old guard seems to be in panic mode, trying to hide money that's disappeared or missing or misappropriated or whatever happened. It's not a surprise, and it's those are the things. That's why we try to let good people to office, so that first of all, that doesn't happen. Second of all, when it has happened, at least they can come in and expose the truth, and we find out what's really going on. So there's a lot of stuff that's busy on that. I do have an ethics complaint I'm working on to file against Inslee, probably Bob Ferguson as well. I don't know why they took me off their Christmas card list, but there's just a bit of work that's involved in this. I wear a lot of funky hats, and it's a lot of odd stuff that I do as an activist, and I always believe that it's easier to teach people how to do something that you've already done yourself a few times, and so I always like to stay current and stay experienced with a lot of these skills so that it's easier for me to teach and be more effective when I'm trying to teach other activists how to do them or how to do the same things. There's a question here, Jana Roberts, how come it costs $65 for a Department of Licensing ID? This country is taxing and feeing their citizens into poverty. Sorry. Well, yeah. Yes, they are. It's a lot more than this. There are so many costs and fees that are radically escalating right now. Were you to take over Washington state government, one of the goals should be to review and clean up fees, especially stupid and dumb fees, but just generally reducing the cost of living in general in the state is a high priority. In fact, it's kind of one of the topics of a video that I filmed earlier, and I think that video I'll be able to launch it tomorrow. But it's just a real problem. The ridiculous costs of living in general, and a lot of those costs are driven directly by government decisions and policies that are made that get simply passed on to you and I. They increase our cost of living. Anything the government does to increase the cost of food production or food delivery or travel or energy or roads, right, or just basic travel type stuff. Anything that they do that increases crime and supports crime, so that you have to spend a lot of your energy and money trying to protect yourself from the criminals that they're unleashing early out of prisons. Anything about this that happens it directly increases your cost of living. And I see it happening everywhere. No state's immune to this right now. However, at a local level, there's a lot of things you can do to roll that stuff back. A little minor story, when I was on the school board in the Rochester School District, I remember, I don't know, I'd been on the board, I think 6 months or something, and I was digging into fees that we were charging parents. And they were nickel and dime dumb fees, like just little fees that we would charge for parents bringing kids to kindergarten. It was kind of ridiculous. Like, it almost seemed like it cost more to collect that fee than it did to charge them. And so I remember one of the things that we did is we just swept through and eliminated a lot of those fees. The other thing that we had, I remember, was they had fees for taking the AP tests, advanced placement tests, or taking the SAT tests. And Rochester School District is a relatively impoverished school district where I live, and it didn't have a lot of students that were taking AP tests or SAT tests, and so they'd sometimes take the class, but they wouldn't actually go and take the tests. And I remember when you added up the total cost, it was very small, and yet you were putting this pressure and excuse on the kids to not take tests because they're going to pay $40 to take that test or whatever it was. And so I remember we waived all those fees. We certainly had a greater percentage of students then that started to take the SAT and the AP test, but good God, we were actually supposedly there for education. And so helping them, making it easier, clearing obstacles in their way so they can actually aspire to something more significant, I don't think that was bad. So I think that that was just an example of getting rid of nickel and dime fees to just simply increase the cost of living. In fact, it just got easier to implement the program, so you didn't have to worry about that stuff. This is funny. So Brian, question for the chat. How many people in here do not pay for their car tab renewals? Great question. There's a lot of people that probably don't, but I bet there's a surprisingly large amount here, because a lot of people, ever since the $30 car tabs fee was shot down in July, have not done that. Cristiano, good question on the price of fuel. I don't think it would be that high, to be honest with you. And part of the reason why I don't think it'll be that high is just simply the corruption of the federal government. I think they'll do anything they can to keep gas prices down low, because the Democrats, especially because they control most of the government positions like that, they're not going to want people rebelling against that much of an increase in the cost. And that being said, $5 seems pretty likely in our state anyway. And of course, we've got the compounded fact of a high gas tax in the first place, and then the carbon tax scam, which has greatly increased the cost of fuel as well. That is the one I think we could repeal, though, and repealing that will certainly reduce the cost of fuel next year. Then you have a question here from David Newton. What about the commissioner that ruled on a magazine ban? Banned is actually what you meant, B-A-N. So the issue with that one has more to do with the Supreme Court has these court commissioners. They're glorified court clerks that actually work for the Supreme Court itself. I used to know how many cases that they heard in a given year. It's quite a few. And the commissioners who serve in that position, they're hyper-partisan. These are hardcore leftists that typically work in these positions. There's nobody in that office or department at all that's remotely close to anything center or normal. There's nobody there that's normal. They're all crazy, raving lunatic leftists who work there. And so the commissioner that did this, that ruled, that gave the emergency stay to the AG's office, is simply doing what is the easiest answer to what they would have there. They aren't going to. Now, that appeal still goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court gets to decide if they want to do that. But they're getting pressured right now from the AG's office, Ferguson, and probably Inslee too, but mainly Ferguson. Inslee's planning to leave, so yeah, he's going to help Ferguson out sort of, but he's not going to help him out that much. Ferguson's mainly worried about this from a legacy standpoint. And so his office has lost a lot of lawsuits that he put out press releases for winning on, and then in the end they lose. So he tries to hide that from the general public so they don't realize how many times he loses. And this is not one that he wants to lose. Just to be fair, so everybody knows, it's Pete Serrano, the Republican candidate currently for AG, that's actually running that particular lawsuit in opposition to the state. So there's a little bit of overlap here on the politics side of things as well. But but the commission, it's not a terribly unusual thing for a commission like that to, especially when the AG's office is going to ask for it, they'll almost always give you an emergency stay. It may not last very long, but they'll do it. And so you'd much rather be in the position where we're in right now, which is that we prevailed. The judge clearly threw it out, well-reasoned and very well-argued case. And now the Supreme Court's going to have to make a decision on that. Now, I think it's going to probably go. There's a process you can use to skip the appeals court, but usually it goes through the appeals court. So I'm not sure where that's going to go at the state level. But it's an unusual and rare success to have in a state court in Washington because most of our superior courts are really, the judges are terrible, and they're almost all political appointees at this point in time. And so we're going to be in desperate. It's going to take us like decades to clean up our court system and judges. But if we start now, it's always better to start now than later and start cleaning these things up. Jason got a question here, not really a political question, but life advice. What kind of jobs can you get with an associate's degree? Been looking for computer jobs is tough. Well, I don't know if I'd look for a computer job right now. I mean, there's a ton of opportunities out there in other fields, not necessarily computers. There are some for computers too, of course. But I would say that I would look for things, it's funny, it depends on what you're looking for, of course, and what your skill set is, but trying to find other types of jobs, just keep your eyes open. Associate's degree is helpful. Getting that next 2 years to get your BA could open the door to a few more. It's not because I have some kind of idealized vision of what you get out of college. You're paying for a piece of paper, essentially, and in many jobs, that's still a requirement to get the job. So the more credentials that you theoretically have along the way, it opens the door a little bit more. It doesn't mean you know anymore. It just means that the doors are opened a little bit more to you. There should be, if you've got a skill already, though, with a computer job of some kind, I'm assuming some type of programming or my recommendation is to specialize pretty carefully so that you can get a job in an area where there's maybe not as much competition, and you can become a true subject matter expert on that. I think it gives more people opportunities. I used to hire computer programmers when I was doing startup companies. I don't know, like 10 of them or so at a time. And there were very specialized skill sets that we were looking for that were hard to find at the time. Low-level coding was a little bit harder for like chipset match. You're trying to take different type of operating system and go right to the chip and program kind of that interface there. That was hard at the time. I mean, it's probably changed quite a bit since then, but do your homework and you're going to find more opportunities out there. Thunderstrike, did you watch the news this year that the Baltimore Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed when a cargo ship collided through a pole? I think it was more than a pole. I think it actually hit the bridge at a vulnerable point on one of the supports. I watched the video, and I was interested in, generally infrastructure things do interest me quite a bit, and I've spent quite a bit of time going over bridges in Washington State. I will point out something that I don't believe that there's very few bridges in Washington that specifically cross over a high-volume cargo traffic area. The exception is really the Hood Canal Bridge, which is a floating bridge, and if a cargo ship hits it, it would cause damage for sure, and it'd probably sink a couple of the floating panels in that bridge. The Hood Canal Bridge has sunk before, and we've had to replace it, but so that's one, because it has like a drawbridge feature so that you can go through it, or the submarines go through it coming out of Bangor. The other one is the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, but it's a substantially different type of bridge, and it's really high. There's no way they're going to hit the bridge, and I believe that spans pretty much the whole area. So the Tacoma Narrows, I don't think you're going to see. I don't think that you're going to see that same type of an event occur there. The other thing to remember is that that's so deep, even if the Tacoma Narrows Bridge did go down, it would actually probably sink and disappear into the water, just like it did the last time it blew apart in the 1940s, and because it's actually quite deep there. I had a cousin that used to go out spearfishing off the bridge. It's a dangerous place because of the currents, but I just remember, there's debris down there where the old bridge blew apart. If you've not seen that video from the 1940s, a classic Washington State story of incompetence and corruption in building a bridge, incompetence in the engineering design. That was back in the early days of Boeing. They didn't use a Boeing engineer, although judging from the parts falling off planes right now, they probably could, and you would have that kind of result. But it was also the state was going to insure the bridge, and they gave money to this guy to go pay for the insurance, and the guy decided to pocket the money and not pay the insurance, and he lied to the state saying he bought the insurance, but he never did, and not even considering the fact that the bridge was going to blow apart a year later. So the state thought they were insured, and then they found out that this guy stole the money, so there was a criminal prosecution and all that other kind of stuff. It's kind of a funny story. It's a good Washingtonian story. Beyond the fact that the video of that bridge blowing apart and explaining wind harmonics and vibrations and all how it can destroy a bridge, and it served as a good warning video to play for generations of engineers in America and around the world. So at least we got something out of blowing that bridge apart. My grandpa drove over, he said in the 30s, and he told me it was one of the scariest experiences he'd ever had in a vehicle, because the bridge would roll so much that they were behind a bus, and the bus would mostly disappear over the roll, and they were riding this roll as the bridge was just completely rocking as they went over it. And he said it was so scary to him that when he got to the other side, they parked the car and got out just to calm down before they went on to the cabin that the family had up at Hood Canal. And so when he was coming back, they were refused to go over the bridge again, and then a few months later it blew up. So it's kind of interesting. Then, all right, yep, V, thank you for, I hope that was helpful on the carbon tax. I hope that answered your question a little bit. Next question, this is from Thunderstrike here. Also, what do you know and have you heard about the Uvalde shooting in Texas back in 2022? Did you watch the news and social media about it? I did. I watched, so I'm pretty familiar with it. I mean, the drama with that particular shooting in Texas was mostly the fact that the police wouldn't go in and stop the shooter. And in the end, if I remember right, it was like a guy from the Border Patrol or somebody who actually went in and took care of the shooter. For whatever reason, the police decided that it really looked like a lot of incompetence, and they decided not to go in and stop the guy, which was amazing because ever since that shooting in Colorado, where they stood outside, because the police rules had generally been that if bad guys take over a facility holding hostages, that you wait and you try to negotiate, or you control the situation. I mean, there was a much slower, methodical approach to how they would control the crime scene as it's happening. And after I'm trying to remember the name of the school in Colorado, Columbine. After the Columbine event, police across the country changed the rules that they would follow significantly. It was no longer go in and control the crime scene. It was go in and immediately find the shooter and take care of him, get rid of him, because the crazies had decided that they were using these experiences or events as a way to hurt people and not to seize hostages. And so anyway, that's where they... But the big issue with Uvalde was the fact that the police failed in their job to go in and stop the shooter. And so because of that, many kids were killed because the shooter was in a room and was methodically killing kids, and the police weren't moving in on it. It was a terrible situation, very heartbreaking, actually, if you read some of the stories from the people who were there and the stories about what happened there. Let's see, Ethan, besides the many slush funds in the state, where do you think the results of these DOT and liquor cannabis taxes are going? No change in education or anything good for this state. For the state, I see. Okay, sorry. It's always hard with typos to keep track of what you mean there. I'm sure that those funds get squandered and wasted just like the majority tax dollars that we give to the state. Whatever they promised you that they were going to use those funds for, it's a meaningless promise. Money's fungible, so essentially whatever they can do to, like, the state, that's what I'm really referring to here, they give the money to the schools, but they don't mind trying to hold as much of the money back for themselves to spend on other things. A little over 50% of all the money raised by Washington State goes straight to the schools. So if you're a bureaucrat or politician in Olympia, that sucks for you because it reduces the amount of money you can hand out as kickbacks or grifting schemes or empire building that you may want to do as a politician in Olympia. And so whatever lies they told you originally to justify the dumb tax that they proposed, it's always a lie. They always divert it later on. It's endless, actually. They just continually do this. Same with it was the buying the lotto, right? If you paid for the lottery, supposedly that money is going to schools. It doesn't. It gets wasted on some other stuff. And so they just squander the money. I mean, frankly, they've had $18 billion of excess revenue, right? Money they didn't even forecast beyond the budget that they had over the last, I want to say about the last 8 years. They've had at least that much money, and it gets squandered, every penny of it. And it gets squandered because there's always, when it's not your money and somebody else's money, you can spend it on all kinds of things. And especially if you have campaign contributors who are going to give you donations, through their membership or through other people by supporting them. So you kick out grants to green grifting operations. You kick out grants to solar panel installation. You kick out grants to support voter registration for leftist causes. You kick out grants for drug addicts, so that people can get to it. That kind of stuff happens all the time. So let me look up here. Somebody said I skipped a question. I'm trying to find it. So somebody here, you say, John, you say I skipped your question, but I don't see a question that you had up here. So post it up again, and I'll catch up to you, but I don't see it anywhere. I don't see any question, actually, that you asked here. At least it's not showing up here. The National Package Delivery Service has a banner on their email that states they are carbon neutral. The only way that could happen is if they bought carbon credits. Where do the carbon funds go? Well, I mean, it's just a scam. It's just buying indulgences, if you're familiar with the Middle Ages, and people, go and sin no more, right? You can buy an indulgence from the church, lets you sin, get away with the sin, you pay for your indulgence. It's no different at all. The entire greenie movement, really, in a lot of ways, is just a religion. It's really it's nothing but a religion. And so what happens is they come up with these little schemes like carbon credits and carbon, tax schemes and things like that. None of these things are going to help improve the environment at all. None of them. I mean, you have to be an exceptionally ignorant person to actually think that it really does. It makes no impact on the environment whatsoever. However, it does make impact on people's pocketbooks. So if you can get yourself involved in the scheme, then you get part of the grift, right? You get part of the skim, you get part of the payoffs, you get part of where the fund goes in. It's about $1.3 billion that are collected from the carbon tax scheme generally across the state. Mostly it's coming off of fuel, and of course people are paying for it to buy their indulgence so that a company like this can pretend to be carbon neutral. And so what happens is you want to be in on the inside of that scheme because you get all this money. It's somebody else's money. Nobody's paying attention to how it's spent. And so it's just it's ridiculous. So anyway, I would say that that company decided that it was better to just pay that than pretend like they're carbon neutral. It's just posturing. That's how they do it. And they'll do that until it's no longer appropriate and then it matters, and then they'll change their posture. Brian B., I have to pay. We have flock cameras and the new construction camera law. And I also live in a county where the police will pull you over for just about anything to make the quota. So I'm not sure exactly what you're saying there, but that's not really a question there. TZ, SB 5982, vaccine definition. Yeah, Washington Vaccine Association changed the definition of vaccine. vaccine now means immunization. That's not the classical definition. You're right, they did. And it was a scam mostly because what they're trying to do, of course, is justify another COVID-19 lockdown future where the big pharmaceutical companies come in with a crappy garbage medicine they're going to call vaccine so that they can force everybody to get it. They make billions of dollars over whatever excuse and story they run. And they get away with it because they can, by redefining vaccine, then they get to call it whatever they want to now. It's really a scam, actually. It is a silly thing. Pete Serrano's great. I agree with you. It's funny. TZ Burton. Yeah, you're telling somebody to go work at Microsoft. That's good. So please do. TZ, these bridge attacks are on purpose. Yeah, they might be. I mean, obviously the FBI is starting to get involved in the container ship right now, and they're probably doing it to look at to see for sure what actually happened with the container ship hitting the bridge like that. That's a pretty amazing low-cost way of destroying a bunch of infrastructure in our country. So experimenting with that is pretty significant. The Galloping Gertie, yep, this was our old bridge. That's what they used to call it, Galloping Gertie, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge for design. Listen, if you don't know anything about this history in this bridge, just Google it, look at the videos. They're all over the place, the bridge blowing up. And it's pretty amazing watching the whole thing come blowing apart. And it absolutely did change bridge design worldwide. So all it takes is having you. We've had a lot of bridges that failed in Washington. We had that bridge, which most spectacularly failed. We had both the Hood Canal Bridge and the I-90 bridge sank. Hood Canal Bridge just was a big storm and was under-engineered by the anchor points. They really just hadn't engineered it correctly, and that one really got taken out by a significant storm in the North Hood Canal. But and that was 79, if I remember right. And then the 1993, while I was in college, I remember watching the I-90 bridge sink while I was in college, watching it on TV. And that was because the Department of Ecology forced them to keep these doors open because they were pressure washing the road, and they didn't want the cement dust to potentially go into the lake. And so they were pressure washing into the tanks inside the concrete floating kind of the floating bridges are made up of these big concrete, hollow, floating kind of panels, for lack of a better term, like air. The air inside the concrete keeps it from sinking, and they left these panels open, and they filled up with water during a storm that came by at that time, and they sank, and the whole bridge went down. So it's just ridiculous. Let's see. Here we go, Pat. By the way, so I'm going back here to John Bauman. No question. I have not seen your question, so put your question up if you got one. Oh, here it is down here. What do you know about Washington joining blue states to bypass electoral college and give electoral votes to winner of the popular vote? Well, that happened a heck of a long time ago. The popular vote was passed in Washington years and years ago. It's only really come up again a couple times because since then, once was in the initiative that was drafted. If you remember, there were 11 initiatives 2 years ago. That was kind of the test bed for what the successful 6 initiatives that were signed last year became. One of those original 11 initiatives actually was to reform the kind of restore the Electoral College in Washington State, but then allocate it by congressional districts, similar to what Nebraska and Maine do right now. Now, remember, Nebraska was trying to change this back, too. The Democrats are fighting against it there because that would give, most likely, a Republican vote in that second district because the dominant voting pattern in Nebraska is Republican. But if it's when they split it, they're sometimes able to get that one part of Nebraska can sometimes go Democrat. So Democrats would fight against allocating votes the same way that Maine and Nebraska do from an electoral college standpoint to the president, because it would allocate probably 4 to 5 congressional districts for Republicans, and then 5 to 6 for Democrats, depending on how voting patterns roll out. So that's Washington's already joined those blue states. That happened long, long ago. 20 years ago, I think, maybe more. But it hasn't really had any relevant impact because right now the popular vote's not constitutionally legal at the federal level. So it doesn't really matter that it's kind of a placeholder law that's been in our state and a lot of other states for a long time. Let's see. Pat Caldwell, you have a question here. Have you heard if the Secretary of Education will investigate and close Evergreen State College? I haven't, but God knows they sure should. I mean, it's impossible to conceive of a college more incompetently run, more disastrous, more useless, more self-destructive, more harmful to the students who attend, and more of a grifting operation than Evergreen State College. It's not the only one out there, but it's got to be one of the worst, probably one of the worst ever conceived of in our country. And it's just so ridiculous that it just keeps existing, squandering our tax dollars, destroying the future of kids that go there. And now, of course, killing kids because they pump carbon monoxide in and then wonder why kids die and have to go to the hospital after the administration tells them to keep going back in because those CO2 or the carbon monoxide alarms, I should say, the CO alarms, they kept going off. They just must be broken. You know, it was amazing. And it's not just that. I mean, that college has everything going wrong with it. And they had a 60% drop in enrollment after 2017. It dropped, just kept plummeting. It bumped up just a little bit lately, but when you've already hit the ground, right, a little bump up isn't much. And remember, that college has a highest percentage of freshman students who transfer away because it's a crappy, terrible, horrible school. There's nothing good about it. It's a horrible environment. It's terrible administration. It's not that you don't have, I think the janitors are probably okay. I think some of the people that work there are okay, but gosh, the professors are terrible generally. If they aren't terrible, they've purged them. And so the administration is almost the worst group of people you could ever possibly put in one building. And they bloated their administration ever since their enrollment's been dropping. So they do these, it's just absurd. So it should be investigated. It's a public safety hazard for any student that goes there. It's not a good thing. And I'm not sure if what you were referring to is that it's a cult at the college, but it probably is. Let's see. HB 2331, which prohibits schools from removing books with inappropriate content. Is there anyone suing to stop this law? Right now, I'm not aware of anybody doing that. I'll have to go back and look at that law a little bit more. I mean, historically, most of the book banning's been going on from the left, right? They took out Dr. Seuss. They took out Ayn Rand. They've taken out the Bible. They've taken out the Constitution. They've taken out Founding Fathers, the Federalist Papers, Hayek's Road to Serfdom. They've taken out almost all the books like that. And so almost all of the purging of any books from school libraries or school curriculum or bookstores or something has been done by the left. So it's interesting to see. I want to read this because if we can utilize that law to get a lot better books into those libraries, it's kind of an interesting thing. But I don't think this is the biggest fight that's going on out there right now. Let's see. I got some follow-up questions from the Uvalde. Sorry, there's a lot of questions popping up now. On the Uvalde question, how do mental health issues play a role in school shootings, and what interventions can be implemented to address this? Okay, well, that's a good question. The first school shooting that I'm aware of, the first attack on a school, but it really wasn't on students, was actually back, I think, in 1922, when a disgruntled, I believe it was an employee, a treasurer of the school district, and I want to say Minnesota, but it was somewhere back in the Midwest, and he actually took a bunch of dynamite and blew the building up and killed everybody in the building, or a whole bunch of people in the building. And that was one of the first. It was a pretty shock to conscience sort of thing back in the 1920s. The next most famous one, and I may not be the only one, and I'll have to go back and look. It's been a few years since I've looked at these things. But there was, down in Texas, there was the shooter at, I thought it was University of Texas, who got up in the bell tower and was a marksman, basically, and shot and killed a whole bunch of college students. You didn't really see or hear so much about school shootings after that for a while. Now, that happened in the 60s, and that was used as a push for the gun control back then, taking away people's firearms and restricting Second Amendment rights because of that guy. And then it went many years. The Stockton school ground shooting in California from 1986 is the one I remember the most, because that was the one that Reagan used as a justification for imposing the first, semi-auto weapons ban in American history. did sunset in the 90s, but I remember I was pretty upset at the time because I was a big gun guy, and I wasn't old enough yet to buy some of those cool guns that I really wanted to buy, some of these rifles. I never got a chance to get them at the time because of that law, because of course it made everything so expensive. So anyway, so that's it was the Uvalde question today is the same question that people who've been paying more attention to some of these shooters that are actually involved, and that is looking at what type of drugs are they on before they go and commit these types of violence, this type of acts of violence. And there has been a fairly consistent pattern of behavior, people who are doing not just these types of crimes, but other types of similar mass shooting, random stranger kills, right, where they're killing people who are strangers. A lot of there's a lot of overlap between that and taking certain types of drugs. I know the kid out in Connecticut, right, a lot of these different people are on a variety of types of medications that clearly change your mental state. And in many ways trying to, of course, attack firearms and saying that people can't defend themselves now because crazy people have done crazy things, misses the problems that clearly exist with overprescriptions or bad prescriptions or just impacts of some of these pharmaceuticals, especially when they're kids. And this is what's happening. So pontoons, yes, that's right. When I was talking about the bridge, calling them pontoons is definitely the appropriate term for that. And I don't know if you remember when they were doing that, the engineers that were originally on the 520 bridge, if you remember when they were doing that, there was a big screw-up, massive screw-up, where they were making these, and they changed the drawings so that they didn't do crosshatch rebar in the concrete. It was some kind of screw-up they did, and of course, they started bringing the pontoons out, and they started leaking and sinking, and they realized it was because of an internal screw-up there. It cost the state, a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's just... that was ridiculous. Incompetence and government kind of go hand in hand. Yeah, get a job in the trades. Totally agree. Here's the next question that I can find. What can we do to ensure continued use of natural gas in Washington? Well, that's a good question, and I do believe I'm not 100% positive that it's happening yet, but it sounds like they're going to repeal the bill that was passed in the legislature, and it's like got an 80% support to repeal the stupid bill about making natural gas hookups harder and more difficult, and eventually setting the stage for making natural gas illegal. One of the things you have to remember about this is this attempt with this legislation to create this kind of, like, imagine Legos, right? Each Lego itself may not seem like it's that big of a deal, but if you keep piling it on, you can make a nice Lego wall. And so essentially that's been the approach over the last 20 years in a lot of these legislative agendas, where there's an overall agenda of taking away your property rights, taking away your medical freedom, taking away your right to privacy, destroying your kids' education, making it more expensive to drive, whatever the basic agenda that's driving it. It's rarely one law. It's really like a collection of laws that they pass. And oftentimes when you look back in the legislative history of those laws, because they make such a minor tweak, there may not be much of a fight. It might have been passed without much attention. Or there was a fight and it got watered down, but it still got one little piece of the Lego piece that they wanted for the wall, and the next one comes on, and that's how they build up the wall to your freedom and liberty and increase the cost of living. Natural gas is no different. They've actually laid the foundation for this a while ago. The most recent one became more obvious, and so now there's going to be a pushback on it, and I don't know what that's going to look like yet. It may be an initiative. It may be a series of other activities. The one thing I want to point out, if you just look around Washington State, the Republicans have a decent chance of picking up a few more seats in the House for sure. Maybe in the Senate too, but definitely the House. And I haven't really analyzed the Senate seats that are up this cycle or the candidates who are likely to run. I'll probably be looking at this closer after filing week coming up. Everyone's obsessing and paying attention to the governor's race, statewide races, the congressional district races, the presidential circus. Maybe you're even paying attention to the initiatives in Washington. But a lot of people seem to have kind of overlooked the legislative changes that are likely to occur, particularly with a number of swing districts in our state that could just as easily go Republican as they do Democrat. And in fact, just the quality of the candidates indicates that they may shift and go Republican. And so I'm anticipating somewhere north of 3, maybe 6 seats switching over. You can't guarantee anything, but it certainly looks like that's how it's shaping up. So that's going to close the gap there in the legislature quite a bit, and it'll make it a little bit harder for crazies to get through. That natural gas thing that they did pass got watered down a lot before it ever hit the final governor's desk, and before it even got voted on the floor. And the opposition was so strong, it was a very narrow decision. So anyway, there's some stuff going on. D. Coop, next question that I can see here in this mix. By the way, it makes it easier for me to see your question if you put an @ We the Government, just so I can actually spot it before I get there. Can we sue the cities who put on pride events and not heterosexual events? I don't know. Probably. Go ahead and try to see if you can put one on, see if they would do it or not. I'd be fascinated. If they tell you no, then I suppose you probably could. Probably not the fight that I would initially prioritize, but each their own, right? If that's your priority, feel free to do it. And it's, see how it goes. Galloping Gertie, yeah. Everybody's correcting the names on this for the bridge. That's pretty funny, actually. Thank you for doing that, Steve Parker. That's a good one. Thank you for doing that. I just think it's funny. Washington politicians suck sometimes, but it's my home too, and that's why I love Washington. And I plan on doing a lot of work to help fix and clean it up. Let's see. This is part of my conversation here about Evergreen. You would think that they'd have sent an expert to check the CO. It's actually CO levels. It wasn't. It's anyway carbon monoxide, but. Yeah, they killing students is what Evergreen will do if they got a chance. So it's pretty bad. It really is pretty bad if you look in that story at all. How can communities come together to prevent future acts of gun violence from schools? Well, one of the things I do believe is obviously having better plans than they currently usually have in most schools. The fight or flight kind of thing probably makes sense if my wife's a teacher, and so I've got a lot of friends that are teachers in schools, and so I know how that works a little bit. I do think that we have a lot of ex-military people that are school teachers or people that are pretty skilled. I think allowing teachers who are skilled and capable to carry would reduce at least some deaths in the long run if we had that. Not every teacher's going to be that person. Most of them probably won't, but all you need is a couple in the building who are capable. Their ability to respond is going to be quicker than the police. And if the police know who they are and there's a little bit of reciprocity with SROs, school resource officers, then I think you'd have just a little bit more of a plan, coming into it. The man gates that they kind of build into modern school design probably help a little bit. There was an old story of a rural school district that I'm aware of where some boyfriend of a teacher was angry, and the clerk that was working the desk looked up and saw him park and walking into the school with a shotgun. And she ran out and locked the main school door before he could come in. And who knows what tragedy she headed off just by being aware. It never resulted in a shooting, and the police eventually came and arrested that guy and talked to him, and there was no tragedy associated with it. So, sometimes just being experienced and paying attention to what's going on really does help, and you can make a big difference that way. Let's see. Jason, California losing $44 million. Did it disappear in somebody's pocket? Well, it always disappears in somebody's pocket. Government loses money like this at volumes and frequency that I think most people would be shocked if they had any idea how bad it really is. Your tax dollars are squandered and wasted at almost every level of government. It's just a question of percentages and amounts. California's a big state, and with exceptionally poor oversight and no transparency. And so it's actually more amazing to me that they even admitted this happened and they weren't able to cover it up. My guess is if you dig in a little bit closer, you'll find it's not 44 million. It's probably more like hundreds of millions. But that'll happen later on. It all depends on how you define. I mean, that's California defining it. Most of us would probably dig into that and look at it and find out that it's probably a lot more money than what they're saying. And yes, a lot of this money gets filtered into other places and it comes back in people's pocket. I think it happens more often than not. That's just how it is. Let's see. Alex, by the way, there's a lot of comments here, but I'm trying to get to questions. Supposedly, this isn't Ask Me Anything. You guys have lots of fun comments, but I can't post them all up here in an effort to try to answer some of the questions that are posted. In regards to highway and road tolls, do you see these being forever implemented, or can they be done away with initiatives, particularly in the case of the Highway 99 toll, tunnel toll? Well, really, there's two tolls in particular in Washington that, well, three. There's three tolls that I believe could easily be done away with. The Highway 99 tunnel toll is one of them. The 405 express lane tolls definitely need to be removed. I think they were illegal to implement in the first place. And really, you need to change that so that on 405, that section from Bellevue, till it goes up north. I can't remember how far it goes, but it's quite a ways kind of through that interchange there, Bellevue, and up into Kirkland and further north. Eliminating that down to one lane so you have a freed up lane, which is what it was originally intended to do when they were expanding 405. That's another one. The tolling there is absurd, and that just needs to go away. And then the other one's the 520 bridge toll. Now, the argument of the 520 bridge toll, which is similar to the history of Washington. The original 520 bridge had a toll bridge on it way when I was younger. I might have been really young when I went over that bridge, and so I don't know if I'm confused by the 520 or the Hood Canal Bridge, which definitely had a temporary toll. But the theory back then was they would have a temporary toll until the bridge was paid for, and then the tolling would go away. And so I remember as a kid going up and paying these tolls, and then eventually the bridge was paid for, and they took the tolling stations out. In those cases at the time, going back decades, the state had originally tried to keep it in longer, just like they did in New York, where their bridges would be paid for 2 or 3 times over, but they'd find an excuse to keep rolling debt around so that they could keep the tolling going, so they could keep the cash and the gravy train going. So Washington state voters had typically rejected that in the past. And as corrupt as politicians always have been, the politicians at that time weren't corrupt enough to have either found a way around it or to get to make it work. Now they're still bringing this East Coast tolling sort of operation into Washington, and it's camel's nose under the tent. Really, the objective is to get rid of those tolls. And that's different than if you go to over the Columbia River. There's Bridge of the Gods, I think is what they call it, that bridge where you pay a little toll to go over that bridge. And that toll is really more about maintaining that bridge. It's not a big toll. It's fairly cheap. It's also not heavily trafficked the way these other bigger tolling operations are up here. And if I remember right, how that bridge was paid for was a little different, how it's managed. So you have a couple small tolling bridges like that in Washington too, but these bigger tolling, those other three that I just mentioned, 99, 520, and 405, those tolls should go away. And yes, they can be removed. Anybody that says they can't isn't paying attention. You can remove them. There's always a way. You have to have the will within the government to do that, and that's not always as simple. Let's see. Let me keep going up here. Sorry, guys. Tons of comments back and forth. Let's see. TZ Burton. Jim Walsh announced 3 new initiatives: no squatters' rights, law enforcement to cooperate to work with ICE. Yes, that's the one about... opening the door. That's pretty good. And they're repealing House Bill 1589. When are the deadlines for signatures? Well, they can't be collected yet because I'm not sure the titles have been issued. So the reason why he might have announced some that he turned in, but they don't really become an initiative that you can collect anything on until after they've gone through the title review process. And then there's a 5-day window you have to wait from to make sure that what you've done is that nobody's challenged the title, right? I've done ballot title challenges before myself. So I don't think they've gone far enough that process where they've reached that point. I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. So because of that, they may be theoretic, they may be in theory initiatives, but they aren't through yet. PNW News and Info. Bridges do require constant maintenance, and where does that money come from? It comes from the Department of Transportation budget. I actually had a neighbor that was one of the primary, for a while he worked for the Department of Transportation, and his job was to inspect bridges all over Washington State. And there's a lot more than people realize. You only see the big and obvious ones, but the true, and you're absolutely right, bridges require constant maintenance. Remember, we also had that Skagit County bridge that collapsed, the main I-5. That was... that was Department of Transportation's just unique stupidity and incompetence as an agency, because that was them, 3 decades ago, deciding to put the wrong height on the bridge, put it the wrong height on all their maps, and then the bridge continually being struck by over limit, extra tall loads, and then them not only the Department of Transportation not go back and fix the signs or fix the map. They didn't go back and fix the bridge. And so eventually one of these struck again, same place, and it was triggered enough that it collapsed that bridge. So that was ridiculous. That's been a history with Washington. A really terrible job building bridges or maintaining them. But maintenance of bridges is really important. What the DOT likes to do is get a project, bloated project, squander about 30% of the money on kickback schemes, mitigation schemes, whatever. Get the bridge built way more than, for a lot more than it should be, and then they tend to cheap out on the maintenance of bridges and roads. That's typically what they do, and the politicians support it because it's not sexy to do maintenance on bridges and roads. Nobody gets rewarded for that or recognized for that. You can't put a name on a plaque because you went and did really good maintenance. And it's one of the bigger problems that they have as far as allocation of funds within the transportation budget, and an adequate distribution of both the expertise and the money to go out and do preventative and proper maintenance. And they don't do a good job on that. And it's one of the things that if you're going to do some reform, you got a Republican in office, there's a substantial amount of work that needs to be done in the Department of Transportation budget, mostly on allocation. They have plenty of money. We are not short of money in the Department of Transportation. We just squander a huge amount of it that they get. So there's some basic work that they can do when they go there and make some adjustments there. So got it. Now I'm understanding what you were talking about in the initiative. You meant the one so it wasn't a bill, it was the initiative that Jim Walsh had put in, but it hasn't come out of the whole final process. So I'm not sure what it looks like yet. Yeah, and by the way, I was going to mention this coming up. I'm familiar with the tolling. I've driven on a lot of I used to have to drive over the toll bridges in New York because when I was going to college, our track and our cross-country course were off campus, and so they let us drive vans, and so I was a van driver quite a bit in New York City, and I would have to drive up every day to cross and go on up to Van Cortlandt Park or Weenfield, which was up north of Manhattan, so you had to go across the bridge up there. So we'd always have, I'm pretty familiar with tolls and just the perpetual tolls that they had, and the tolling roads that they have like down in Florida or other parts of the East Coast. Washington has a large enough budget, and historically has, that we can actually build good roads, and we don't need to have tolling on them in most cases. I think it has to be very rare and very limited when we do. You can't trust the government with that kind of stuff. You can't. It's just not if you want a future. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge tolling, right, which they do for that one as well. But in theory, I think that still set up the structure the way that it's supposed to be with the other bridges. Once a bridge is paid for, in theory, that tolling goes away. I haven't gone back to double check to see that that's true, but I believe that was how that was structured, which was more consistent with the historic approach that Washington's taken when they used to do the Hood Canal tolling, when they used to do the original 520 tolling. That kind of tolling I can accept a little bit. I cannot accept this endless, perpetual, incompetent tolling that they're doing on these other places. So there's a lot of work. Somebody who grew up swimming at Van Cortlandt Park. Well, I used to run there. I used to go up there running a lot, and that was where I would run for cross country. And that was a lot of our practice that we had up there. So small world, and actually I kind of like that park up there. It was not a safe place to be at night when I was there in college. Maybe it is now, but it was sketchy at night. But I used to go up there a lot during the day and spend a lot of time running. Ran a lot of miles up there. Here's a question here. What is the most effective thing I can do to support the rule of law in a state that considers the Constitution a group of bad suggestions? Number one, get involved with the political process. When I say that, it's not about so much joining the party. I mean, that's fine. But and doing something like that it helps you become more familiar with what's going on. What I would do is pick a project locally that you can get interested in. It should be something you're interested in. Don't make yourself become interested. It's hard to force yourself to be interested in something that you aren't. But a city council, school district, whatever it is, become familiar with how they're operating and what they're doing. If you're interested in eventually running for office, that level of research is going to help you set you up to be more familiar with what you could do to get in and what you would do when you got in to make a difference and fix things. So if you do that, that's great. If you don't and you just want to understand it and see what's going on, it's a great practice opportunity for you to dig in and find out how they're spending their money. If you want to find out what's going on in local government and state government too, right, start with money. The money is what you start with. And once you start to get the money, you start to figure out if there's any corruption or problems or incompetence. Follow the money. It dictates almost everything. Now, it's not the only thing, but there's different sequences of things you look at. If it's a school district, you look at the vouchers that they're signing off on every month, go through the history of the vouchers, go back as far as you can so you get pretty familiar with them. You pull credit card records, you pull per diems, you pull calendars, from the records request, you get that kind of stuff. And then that starts to give you a fairly good picture of what's going on. And then when you see questionable vendors, start pulling the contracts on those vendors, start pulling correspondence with those vendors. That's how you'll tend to find out if they're real or if there's something sketchy going on, or if there's kickback schemes with staff. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can find once you start to dig into it now. So that's what I would do. Pick a project and start focusing on it. It's amazing how much you can actually learn if you do that. Brian, you got a question here. Do I still run? No, not really. I mean, I have a son that's actually a competitive runner right now, so I'm kind of living vicariously through him. I ran for about 20 years competitively. I ran in high school. I ran before I joined my high school cross country team. I had a lot of uncles that ran. In fact, if you go to Hazen High School in Renton, you'll see that my Uncle Jimmy still holds the school 2-mile record at 9:01, if I remember right. And then and several other uncles also ran. And then I ran. My brother also ran when he was in high school behind me. I won the South Puget Sound League cross country championships when I was in high school running for TJ in Federal Way. And I went to state in the 2-mile. I wasn't super fast, but I was adequately fast at the time, which was enough. And I ran in college all 4 years. And then after college, I really spent many years running for probably about 10, 11 years. I ran for ASICS for a little while, just ran for Club Northwest, and really enjoyed running road races and doing triathlons and stuff. And that's actually how I met my wife originally. So running's is a great background to have, I think, when it comes to athleticism. And so it was great for me, and I would encourage it for anybody else. I know I'm going to have to eventually close this out here today. Roy, you had a question here about the fairgrounds in Vancouver. It's a washboard. I don't know, I-5, if it's actually I-5, it's the state. But they'll use federal funds for that repair usually. I like that. Yes, running for the refrigerator is important. Let's see. The state has plenty of money. We don't need to pay tolls usually. But anyway, with that, guys, a lot of questions here. So hopefully I didn't miss too many when I was going through this. Sorry about the slightly late start that we had. And hope all is going well for you guys. And thank you guys for tuning in. Hope this was a good Ask Me Anything session. Next week we'll probably be talking about the Republican convention when we get back. So just remember, the future belongs to those who show up. As I always say, I got 2 videos coming up. Enjoy them. Hit like, share if you like what we've done here.